Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very much for this very interesting conference with a very rich debate. I am Ludovica Paseri, a PhD student of last GD of the University of Bologna and Torino. And today I want to talk about the access to scientific information and knowledge as a matter of democracy. I divided my presentation in 5 sections. After a brief introduction, I will describe the main concepts involved, namely information, knowledge, and democracy, or better, the relation between knowledge and democracy. Then I will describe, I will analyze the impact of the digitalization on knowledge, specifically scientific knowledge, taking into account the production and the dissemination and the actors involved. In section 4, I will focus my attention on the main issues identified to conclude with some final consideration. The scope of my research is represented by these 3 elements: access to knowledge, democracy, rights, and freedoms. And I analyze the relation between these 3 components. So, considering this scenario, what's the problem? Which kind of problem we have to face? Although the integrity of the shared information is a very debated topic, sometimes we don't realize to what extent it can be problematic. For example, as shown in this report I put in the slide, entitled Fake News and Disinformation Online, published in 2018, 37% of respondents said they encountered misleading news and not trusted information every day. But the point is, what happens when the reliability of information and knowledge resulting from scientific research is questioned? The COVID-19 pandemic is making it even more explicit, more clear how relevant is the sharing of correct, not fake information, scientific information. So, how to proceed? The aim is to investigate how institutions can promote access to and dissemination of knowledge, especially scientific knowledge, both to academia and to citizens. How? Analyzing the main problems involved and adopting the institutional perspective. The main concepts involved are information, scientific information, and knowledge. Although there are many proposals for taxonomy regarding the concept of data, information, and knowledge, I adopted the perspective of the philosopher Luciano Floridi, and if the data is considered as an element of discontinuity, an element of non-conformity, instead the information, starting from this first definition of data, is to be understood as data characterized by interpretation, by meaning, bringing out its semantic conception. The concept of scientific information refers to information that arises from a process, the so-called scientific process, which represents the methodology through which science operates, which is based on verifiability, on the verifiability of the results. The concept of knowledge then, rather than being represented as a stratification of information, again following the perspective of the philosopher Luciano Floridi, should be considered as a network of questions and answers, is the ability to problematize the arguments. Now, regarding the relation between knowledge and democracy, the Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is absolutely fundamental. The first paragraph focuses on the individual aspect of the participation in the cultural life, and the second paragraph refers to a different aspect, namely the production of knowledge representing an individual right right of the author. But also the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union is essential, and we should consider Article 11, dedicated to the freedom of expression and information, and Article 13, dedicated to the freedom of arts and sciences. Well, this is the legal framework on which is based the relation between knowledge and democracy, and we should always take it into account, take it into consideration. So what is relevant? First of all, in particular from Article 27 emerges the collective aspect, with a specific mention to the community. In addition, closely related to the topic of dissemination of knowledge, there is the issue of intellectual property. One topic necessarily involves the other, so they are strictly connected. And it also should be stressed that the fundamental principles and rights should not be considered only as abstract, inspiring principles, but as cornerstones of societal developments. Finally, the final element, manipulating information and knowledge can easily become a mean for manipulating democracy. The unreliability or even just the fear of unreliability of shared information and knowledge triggers a sort of existential fear. This fear can be easily exploited to the benefit of the most varied forms of populism and nationalism. And so this is a risk, this is a real risk. Well, as regards the impact of ICTs, of the digitalization, the digital revolution on knowledge, we should consider separately three aspects: production, dissemination, and actors, so the actors involved. First of all, as regards the production of knowledge, it is essential to consider the shift towards the open science paradigm. The open science is an umbrella concept. It refers to the openness of every phase of the research cycle. So it means an open collection of data, the use of open methodologies and open tools, tools with open source, characterized by open source. For data analysis, and also the publication of scientific articles in open access journals. And it means also the open educational resources. But the shift towards open science also describes the second aspect, the dissemination of knowledge. One aspect that I think it's essential to emphasize is that the emergence of the open science paradigm is made possible, if not generated, precisely by the use, by the massive use of technologies, of ITCs in the world of scientific research. It appears as a direct consequence. And the use of ICTs and the union between internet and scientific research represents the convergence of two worlds that have no territorial boundaries traditionally understood from a geographical point of view. Openness and greater sharing is in some way impossible to avoid. Well, we say open science paradigm. Open science, yes, but with limits. With limits, of course. And the limits are represented by the formula as open as possible, as closed as necessary, as also reported in the recent European Strategy for Data published in February 2020. So this formula means that sharing is allowed to the extent that it doesn't infringe interests or rights protected by law. For example, the fundamental right to the protection of personal data or public security interests that require the data to be closed. The last fundamental aspect to consider is that of the actors involved. Certainly, predominant role is played by traditional actors, so researchers, universities, research centers, although for them too there are some novelties related to the use of ICTs. Secondly, citizens. Once again, it's useful to consider the example of the COVID-19 pandemic. The fact that every evening virologists, scientists are invited as a speaker, so are invited speakers in the national television, in national television programs, means that citizens expressly demand, expressly request the communication of information and knowledge of a scientific type, which moreover must be reliable. Finally, the use of ICTs brings with it the emergence of new players, the providers of services, the new intermediaries. And one example can be the management of the databases through which access is made, not only for scientific data, but also for the papers, the publications, so the scientific literature. Clarified the impact of the ICTs on the field of scientific research, considering that the aim is to investigate how institutions can promote access to and dissemination of knowledge, scientific knowledge especially, both to academia and to citizens, then to be able to do this, it is essential to be aware of the challenges we should face. And I have organized these challenges, these issues in 3 different layers: infrastructural layer, governance, and legal layer. The first one, the infrastructural layer, is represented by the problem of the digital divide. It is a sort of a prerequisite, essential to develop any other aspect of this study. As also underlined yesterday by Jeffrey Sachs, there are many individuals who today do not have the devices or the internet connection or the digital skills necessary to access the resources available. Once again, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, gives a very clear example. Before, the digital divide could be perceived as a secondary problem, maybe linked to the guarantee of further well-being in the life of individuals. Now, access to the online resources has become a primary good. Being disconnected represents a considerable damage due to the online transformation of work, but also of the education. The digital divide becomes a matter of equality, and it's important to underline that work and education are fundamental rights, are protected as fundamental rights, as ensured in Article 13 and 14 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and also in the Article 26 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The second layer is the layer of governance. And in this related to this aspect, first of all, we should consider the global dimension of the phenomenon. As I said before, knowledge transcends national borders. The search for a vaccine for COVID-19 made it clear. Secondly, we should start from the configuration of knowledge as a common good. And in such a situation, the dissemination of knowledge on internet might be obtained thanks to the definition of terms of service, which allow openness as much as possible with the required balance of opposing interests involved, avoiding the transfer of the ownership. About the reliability of knowledge, the problem is extremely complex, both from the point of view of the production of news and false information online. So I am talking about the phenomenon of fake news, but also from the point of view of the issue of the verifiability of the results of science. That is even more complex by the use, thanks to the use of big data and encrypted data in science. In this scenario, obviously, it's necessary taking into account the role of new actors, so the intermediaries. Then, third layer of issues is the legal layer. This topic is linked to the problem of the relationship between law and technology. I refuse techno-deterministic theories in which law try to catch the technology failing, but it's necessary to point out that legal institutions are not immutable. They must be changed if they do not meet the needs of the society, the needs of their time, the needs of the society of today, our society. An interesting example is the academic copyright, as I analyzed in the paper that will be published in the proceeding. To conclude, we should start from the aim that was to investigate how institutions can promote access to and dissemination of knowledge, especially knowledge, scientific knowledge, both to academia and to citizens, protecting the rights and freedoms involved, and avoiding the risk of manipulation of democracy. Well, the digital impact of knowledge is represented or should be represented by the paradigm of open science. The issue identified are the infrastructural issue, the governance issue, and the legal issue. But although these complex issues must be tackled, the institutions should consider it as an opportunity to change our mentality and to reshape our society. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.